Welcome to the 2 Acre Homestead podcast. I'm your host, Lisa, and on today's episode, we are going to be talking about making room on your homestead for animals. So let's get started. Welcome to the 2 Acre Homestead. Come along with us on our journey from a small suburban homestead lifestyle to our new lifestyle, homesteading in the rural countryside of southern Arizona. We'll share with you our tips, tricks, successes, and failures from both our past suburban lifestyle to our new rural lifestyle, all on the 2 Acre Homestead. Welcome to the 2 Acre Homestead podcast. I'm your host, Lisa, and on today's episode, we are going to be talking about making room on your homestead for animals. So let's get started. Okay, so on today's episode, like I said before, we're talking about making room for animals on your homestead. I tell you, but having animals on your homestead is just so essential because they really add to the symbiosis that you are trying to attain in producing your own food. Whether you choose to eat said animals or not, they are essential in food production. But you need to, and I'm referencing a previous episode, and this is basically my husband and I's motto of life, and that is have a purpose and have a plan. You need to have a plan for these animals. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And we're going to break that down into 3 big topics, and that is the why, what, and how. And then we're going to unpack all of those. So first topic is why. Why do you want animals on your homestead? Every person has to answer that for themselves individually. Different animals produce and give different things to a homestead. So for example, if you've moved on to some acreage, and let's say there's a woody part of your acreage where there's a lot of trees and so forth, and you want that particular area dug up, rooted out, then you may want pigs. Pigs might be the perfect animal for that particular job because that's what they do. They're a rooting animal. Let's say you want to set up a big garden, and in this section of your garden, you know you're going to be growing lots and lots of corn. Well, corn is a nitrogen hungry plant because it's a part of the grass family, so it survives on high nitrogen. Well, rather than running out to the store and buying a bunch of nitrogen fertilizer that you may or may not be able to buy due to shortages as of the recording of this, you send your chickens onto that plot of land because when they defecate nitrogen-rich poop. So the chickens might be the best animal for that job. But it's not just jobs that animals fulfill on a homestead. Most animals, if not all animals that are used on a homestead, have multiple purposes. So for example, I just used pigs. Well, pigs they can provide you with meat. They can root up an area, and they can consume kitchen waste and scraps, and they can fertilize. They can actually fertilize a certain plot of land. Chickens are known as the gateway animal into homesteading, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. And that's because chickens are so they are so multi-purpose. They provide you with eggs. They provide you with meat. They fix nitrogen into the soil. They are used for bug control. Ducks are another one. They eat the bugs. I used to wonder a long time ago, why do so many people have ducks on their homesteads? And that's because ducks will eat bugs without destroying a garden. And they produce eggs and they produce meat, if that is the kind of meat that you like to eat. So you need to know why you want these animals, what the purpose of those animals are for your homestead. And then the other question that you want to ask yourself is, how long until that purpose is accomplished? Now, I know that's kind of a weird question, but let me just use goats as an example, because I have friends who have goats or who have had goats in the past, and they had goats for a very specific purpose. They wanted a particular land, a particular paddock cleaned off, and everything chewed down. The goats are really good at doing that. And when that purpose was done, they gave the goats to somebody else who wanted to use those goats for, their farming purposes. So knowing how long you want that animal, knowing the purpose and how long that purpose is necessary on your homestead. Adding to that is knowing where and how you can provide for this animal in a, what I love to call, and if you're new to this podcast, you're going to hear me say this a lot, and that is a closed loop system. So on this podcast, the 2 Acre Homestead, we kind of have, my husband and I have this belief system when it comes to our homesteading practices, and that is we try to eliminate the outside world as much as we possibly can. We can't do it totally, and I would never strive to do that totally, but as long as we can produce our own food and we can create a cycle on our homestead where an animal is producing something and then that produces food for us, and that food that we produce produces food for said animal. It's a continuous circle, and it doesn't require a lot of outside intervention. I'm going to use rabbits as an example. We have rabbits here on our homestead. Rabbits are fantastic when it comes to their poop. And when you can put their poop into your garden, you are going to see a tremendous growth in your gardens. Well, the things that I can produce in my garden can in turn not only feed me and my family, but also can be used to help offset some of the feed for my rabbits, and the cycle continues. So you want to know, if you have an animal that you're bringing onto your property, what is the purpose and how long is this purpose? Is it going to be a long time commitment? For example, going back to the example of the rabbits, rabbits are a long-term commitment for me and my husband. But if we were to, like some of our friends, get goats and we just had a short time purpose for them, then you need to know that going into bringing that animal onto your property, because that is going to affect the next subtopic here, the next bullet point, and that is the what. When you are doing research on your animals, that's the first thing you want to do. So you know your why, you know the purpose. Now you want to research your animal. because not all animals are the same. For example, there are rabbits that you can keep as pets, and there are rabbits that you can keep for meat purposes. Those are two different types of rabbits that you would keep. So, a California white or a New Zealand, those are examples of meat rabbits. They are heavy, they are big, and they produce wonderful poop, but they also produce wonderful meat. So when you're researching your animals, let's say you just want a pet rabbit because all you want is just a few rabbits just to keep for their poop. Well, you may not want a meat rabbit. You may not want that rabbit because that rabbit is going to consume more food than your pet rabbit, your smaller, let's say your smaller lop-ear type of rabbit. That rabbit's not going to consume as much food as, let's say, a New Zealand rabbit or meat rabbit. That rabbit's going to consume more food and require more resources from your homestead. So you want to do your research. Another example is when it comes to cows. We are actively in search for a dairy cow, and that is for later this year going into next year. But we are definitely knee-deep we're actually just coming out of the knee-deep phase of researching what type of cow we are looking for. We're looking for a milk cow, and we have settled on a particular type of cow that we would like to have. But we did our research, and we've been doing research, and we figured that for what we are looking for, we know the type of cow that we want. And because we know the type of cow that we want, we know the type of infrastructure or supplies that we're going to need for that cow.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Are you looking to build a homestead from the ground up? Or maybe you're looking to build an off-grid dream home, a vacation home, or maybe just a piece of land to call your own. Visit yourcheapland.com to buy rural land in the wide open spaces of southwestern United States. When you visit yourcheapland.com, they're here to help you, and with their help, you can do this. You can take your dream of owning land and make it a reality. Most down payments are only $294, including the document fee. Remember, everyone qualifies for financing at yourcheapland.com. Head on over to yourcheapland.com and start making those dreams come true. And now, back to our podcast.
So doing your research will help you to not only know the type of animal, but it will also help you with knowing the type of supplies that you need for that animal. Here is a pro tip. This is something that my husband and I have found practical in our homesteading journey, that when we are at this point of researching, we're doing our homework, we're looking into bringing an animal onto our homestead. And I have to say, we are actually at this point right now with cows. But when it comes to researching and finding the supplies that you need for that animal, oftentimes we will start buying the non-perishable supplies that we need for that animal often a year in advance. Yeah, a year in advance, depending on the size of the animal. So for us, a cow is the largest animal that we are ever having on our homestead, or that we ever have had on our homestead. And so we're at a point that now we know the type of cow that we want, the type of dairy cow that we want. Now we know, okay, there are certain supplies that are non-perishables that we're going to need for said animal. And so we're purchasing those now. And I say that as a pro tip for all of you because of where we are right now in the supply chain issues. Because the more planning you can do, the more you can plan for having an animal, no matter how large or how small the animal is, or how many the animals are, the more you have as far as your supplies, medical supplies. If you're talking about getting chickens for the first time, go out, get yourself some Blue Coat, get yourself some feeders, some water feeders. Yeah, you're probably going to change how you do things and the supplies. You will change those things as time goes on and as you're interacting with the animal. You'll find some things work for you and some things don't. But you have the basics and you're ready to go when the time comes to have that animal on your property. So having the supplies and knowing what supplies you need is very essential. The third thing, I would say, I think a lot of homesteaders, I think a lot of experienced homesteaders will tell you their horror stories. And I know we have some ourselves where we fall short of this third bullet point. And that is the how. How do you bring this animal onto your homestead? The first thing, even though we just talked about supplies, supplies are completely different from infrastructure. Infrastructure is a completely different ball of wax because we're talking about housing for the animals, housing for their food. If you have an animal that's going to be eating hay for most of the year, where are you going to store that hay? Do you have a barn? Do you need to build one? Do you need to build an area for that hay to be stored safely? Do you need to build a stanchion for a milk stanchion if you're getting a dairy cow? I know that is something that we are looking at. We need to build a milk stanchion because we're talking about getting a dairy cow. Infrastructure is so important. And I think all of us experienced homesteaders have had that experience where we get so excited about homesteading and you rush out and you buy the animal and you're like, oh my goodness, where are they going to sleep? Oh, we'll figure it out. The first time we got chicks, our very, very first time ever getting into chickens, I rushed out. I actually didn't even rush out. I happened to be, I think it was like at a Tractor Supply or feed store, something like that, but I think it was Tractor Supply. And I saw these cute, fluffy little chickens. And I mean, they were chicks and they were just so adorable. And next thing I know, I don't even know what happened, but somehow I'm driving away from Tractor Supply and there's this chirping in the back of my car. I had bought chicks, brought them home, and we had no idea what to do. I mean, I had some, we bought some heat lamps, but I had no idea where we were going to put them. Nothing, no plan, no nothing. Just, here's some chicks. I'd like to have chickens. Complete failure. Failure of having a plan, having a vision. Fortunately, those chickens lasted a very long time. They lasted for years. They were our first flock. They were a beautiful flock. And I'm very grateful that I have a husband who was able to do some things on the fly. But I will tell you the amount of stress that caused both of us as these chickens grew, because we both were working full time. He didn't really have time to build the chicken coop. He had to take time off from work. I know my husband was a little bit upset with me. But he was a team player and he was willing to do it. But my point in bringing this up, and I think you will find this as a recurring theme with all homesteaders. When you do this, you bring an animal onto your property without having a plan, having a vision. You've not gone through these steps of, why do I need this animal? What do I need to have to make this animal comfortable on my homestead? And putting in the correct infrastructure and talking to your family, your mate, or whoever you're living with, talking about this animal is going to be on the property. When you are not doing those things, you are causing so much stress and frustration. It's better for everybody to be on the same team, everybody working together. It causes less stress. And believe it or not, it causes less stress for your animals as well. Because your animals can sense when you're stressed out, just like kids. They know when you're stressed. So when you're stressed, guess what? They're going to be stressed out too. So have your infrastructure in place. Have these things in mind when you're bringing an animal onto your property. The other thing, as far as how you're bringing an animal onto your property, and that is, what do they need in that infrastructure? What do they need? Do you need to create a place where it has really good ventilation? Is it going to be a place where the animal is going to need some sort of electricity because maybe they need grow lights? Maybe you need lighting because, it's a milking stanchion, or maybe, you're expecting that animal to give birth. Maybe you've bought some goats and you've bought a pregnant goat and you want her to have a stall that is filled with lots of hay, and you want lots of lighting in there so that you can see when she's giving birth. Things like that it's those tiny little things that can cause frustration. So knowing up front what are the things that the what and the how and the why is just super important. The other thing when it comes to bringing an animal onto your homestead, and I have stated this before, but that is including your family in on this conversation. Don't just go and do like what I did, where it's like all of a sudden your husband comes home and it's like, oh, there's this animal. Talk to your spouse about it. Talk to your family about it. Once you've gone through all of these steps, figuring out the purpose, doing your research, putting in the infrastructure, all of you do the research on the animal together. And I say it this way because when it comes time to purchasing the animal, all of you go together. And the reason is you might be focused on, oh, this animal is so cute, lovely, blah, 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 blah. But your spouse, or maybe, your more adult children, they might be able to see, well, hey, there's something wrong with this animal here. Or remember when we did research on this animal, we were supposed to ask, was this animal blah, 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 blah. They are going to look at things from a different perspective. So the more perspectives you can have, the more opinions, the more eyes you can have on that animal and the growing situation that that animal has been experiencing is invaluable. The other thing, when it comes to including your family in on this purchase, in on this animal, is remembering that you are a team. So when that animal is on your property, you need to have delineation of responsibilities. Whose responsibility is it for this animal? So, like, for example, on our homestead, we have chickens and rabbits currently right now. The caring of the rabbits and the caring of the chickens, making sure everybody is fed, making sure everything is cleaned out, cages are clean, coops are clean, and making sure of the overall health of the animals. On our homestead, that all is my husband's responsibility. My responsibility with the animals is to make sure that the fresh food that they eat is provided for them, making sure that I collect all the eggs, and I serve as a backup to my husband when it comes to animal husbandry, because I know pretty much as he does. We both have the same knowledge. We study it together. There are some things I am stronger in than he is, especially when it comes to the animal health. Sometimes I'm a little bit more knowledgeable on certain things than he is. But on the day-to-day grind of taking care of the animals, he's way more adept at it because he does it all the time, whereas I don't. I simply just make sure they have the food that they need, the fresh food, and collecting the eggs and making sure the rabbits get good pettings and lovings. But that is how we do it on our homestead. You may do it different on your homestead, and that's perfectly fine. You have to do what's right for your homestead. But the point is that you need to work as a team. So if your spouse is not all on board with a particular animal, then it may be that you need to just forego having that animal. Because if that all relies on you and you're not backed up by your team, which is the team that is inside your home, that can cause additional stress. And that additional stress can cause homestead burnout. And believe me, it is a real thing. And there is nothing that can cause homestead burnout quicker than animal mismanagement. What is animal mismanagement? Neglecting the animal, not being able to take care of it properly, or all of the responsibility of managing that animal is on one person and no one else is helping that person. That can make a person burn out on homesteading faster than you can say boo. It also, if you're a married couple, it can also cause undue stress on your marriage. So these are things that you want to make sure of, is make sure your family, your team is on board with having this animal. I cannot stress that enough. Make sure you have your team. So you've got your team, you've got all of everything's prepared, you're ready to go, and you rush out and you've brought your family with you. Like I said, you've brought multiple eyes with you to buy this animal. What happens when you go to look at an animal? What happens if that person that you're purchasing or thinking that you're going to purchase the animal from, let's say you get there, because this has happened, you get there and you realize this is either not the animal you want, not the animal they were saying was for sale, or you get there and you realize the conditions on this farm are not the same conditions that I would raise my animals on. They don't have the same growing practices that I do. And I don't know that I want to bring these potential diseases onto my property. What do you do when you can't bring an animal onto your property? Very simply, you say, thank you for showing, but I think at this point in time, we need to do a little bit more research, and you walk away. When you are on someone's property and you are looking to purchase an animal, do not be afraid to ask questions, and do not be afraid to say, thank you, but no thanks. You do more harm than good when you are trying to bring an animal onto your property and that animal has a disease or comes from a place that looks like it may not be as clean and sanitary and up to snuff or up to the standards that you would grow your animal in. That has happened to me before. And it recently happened where I purchased a rabbit from someone and I thought to myself, I should have backed out. And lo and behold, I should have. Because that particular rabbit, even though she's on the homestead, she has been so neglected, she cannot hardly be handled at all. And it's because of the growing practices of the person that I purchased the rabbit from. So don't be afraid to say no. If that animal does not fit your homestead, don't be afraid to say no. Walk away. And that can be really, really hard. It was really hard for me. Now, fortunately, for me, I knowledgeable enough with rabbits where, I've now that rabbit, we call her Big Mama, and Big Mama is now an active member of our little rabbitry, and you can handle her and pet her, and she's okay. But it took her some time to get used to being handled because where she came from, I should have walked away, but I felt this sort of, I wanted to rescue her. And I did. But I say that because, don't be afraid to walk away. I think a lot of times we get afraid, we get so excited to bring an animal on to our property, and then we realize that wasn't a good fit. So don't be afraid to walk away from an animal. The other thing, let's say it's the other side of the scenario. You've gone to the farm, you see the animal is perfect. You need to make sure that you are able to transport that animal onto your property. I say this and I'm speaking out of experience because it has happened, where I've purchased an animal and it's like, oh, I'll just throw him in the back seat. Yeah, no. You need the correct cages. You need the correct trailers. Make sure you are able to transport that animal onto your property safely. Don't just, wing it. You want to safely transport your animal onto your property. And then if it's an animal that you are adding, when you're adding, you bring it onto your property and you're adding it, let's say, to a flock or to a herd, do not introduce that animal right away. Wait. Quarantine the animal. Yes, at this stage in this year, 2022, I think we all know what quarantine means. You want to quarantine that animal for 7 days. Set that animal aside for 7 days. And that goes back to infrastructure. It's not just animal housing, like where you're going to house this animal, but if you need to quarantine that animal, where can you safely quarantine said animal? Do you have a separate area to quarantine them? Something to think about. But going back to bringing the animal on property, you want to quarantine them because in the event that they do have a disease or, some situation, you don't want it affecting your other animals. So you quarantine them first. And then once they've passed that quarantine period, 7 days, you have to do your research on each animal, and each animal is different. But once you've done your research and you found, I'm using 7 days as an example, quarantine the animal for 7 days, then introduce the animal into your flock or herd, then everything is A-okay. And keep a heavy eye on the newbie, on the new animal, because a lot of times, like for example with chickens, there is a pecking order, and that pecking order is real. And I think with all animals, actually, they all have an order. So there's a head animal, and then there's the lowers. And they all need to rearrange themselves and figure out who's in what order and go from there. So you need to keep an eye to make sure that when you bring your animal onto property, when you've introduced it to the flock or to the herd, that it integrates into the flock or herd in a non-aggressive, non-violent way. If it becomes an issue, then you need to, again, quarantine, look up your information again, do your research, find out, make sure you're, introducing that animal correctly. And if it just does not take, that animal does not integrate well with your flock or with your herd, then you need to have the animal move on, find a different zip code, find a different address, rehome that animal someplace else. The reason why it is not worth sacrificing your entire flock or your herd for the one animal. It's just not worth it. The same goes if that particular animal presents a safety issue. For example, let's say you wanted to get a Jersey cow and you got a bull. I don't know why you would buy just a bull by itself, but let's say you just did. And Jersey bulls are notorious for being a little on the aggressive side, and you have small children. Well, if that bull lives up to its reputation and it is on the aggressive side and you are worried and concerned about the safety of your family and humans and other animals that are already established on your property come first before the single one animal. the animal needs to be dismissed from your property and rehomed. So, making room for your animals on your homestead is a process. But I tell you what, it's a wonderful journey. And it's something that you will never regret. It's hard. It's hard work getting them on your property, but once they are there and once they've, now that they fit in on your property, having them there, having them a part of your closed loop system is just fantastic. So I hope that this episode helps you to think about gives you some ideas, think about some ways on introducing animals onto your homestead and making room for them in your homesteading life. I hope that this episode finds you and your family well. And until next time, be safe out there.